The wind howled through the crumbling remnants of what was once a thriving street, now abandoned like the people who had once lived there. The remnants of old tire tracks in the dirt marked the path of something that long passed, something untraceable but forever lingering. Amid the detritus of broken bottles, discarded plastic, and layers of waste that no one wanted to see, a faint whimper echoed. A tiny trembling puppy, covered in dirt and scabs, was curled in the corner of a trash heap, eyes wide with terror and confusion. There was no mother to comfort it, no hands to lift it. The world had turned its back on this small life. The puppy's ribs were visible beneath its thin, matted fur, and the once bright eyes seemed to reflect an unspoken grief, a memory of a love lost, perhaps never known. The sound of sirens in the distance only seemed to grow louder, but they were far too late. For now, the puppy was all alone. What had brought the small soul to such a forsaken place? The answer would tear open a truth none of us wanted to face. The air was thick with dust as the puppy lay there, body frozen with fear, eyes wide and unblinking. A small, unkempt thing huddled against the debris of the abandoned street. It had been there for days, weeks maybe. Its tiny body shook in the cold wind, its ribs pushing against its fur, visible like the bones of a ghost. No one knew why it had been left behind, but its hollow gaze said everything. It was alone, unwanted. It was nothing more than a piece of trash in a world that had tossed it aside. The sound of the street's emptiness seemed louder now, echoing like an absence, a vacuum where the puppy's hopes had once been. It didn't even try to bark anymore. The streets, once filled with the echo of children's laughter, now offered only a cruel silence. How long could it survive here? How long before the bitter cold or the sharp claws of starvation took everything from it? The woman's boots crunched the gravel as she turned the corner, eyes narrowing in the dim light of the setting sun. She wasn't sure what had drawn her here, but the pit in her stomach had grown too strong to ignore. Her breath fogged in the chilly air as she spotted the tiny form, crouched low and near invisible beneath the pile of rubbish. Her heart stuttered, then broke. She rushed forward, and the world seemed to slow. When her hands wrapped around the puppy, its fur was caked with dirt, and its tiny body felt like nothing more than a frail wisp of life. She cradled it gently, the whimper it made causing something to break inside her. "Shh, it's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was comforting. The puppy's eyes locked with hers, wide and empty, and for a moment she wondered how it could still be alive, how something so small could survive in such a cold, uncaring world. As she pulled the puppy close, a sudden glint of metal caught her eye. Beneath the pile of refuse, partially obscured by crumpled paper and old plastic, was something almost forgotten. A collar. It wasn't much, but it was enough to tell her that this puppy hadn't always been alone, that there had been someone. A collar that had once held the promise of care, of love. Her heart twisted, and a tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. "Who did this to you?" she murmured, fingers trembling as she picked up the collar, holding it in her hands like an old wound. But there were no answers here. The only thing she could do was take the puppy, to give it what little she had left to offer. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew she couldn't leave it here. Not like this. She rushed home, her mind racing with the same questions that had gnawed at her heart for years. Questions of abandonment, of love lost, of promises broken. She had lived through it all, too. The puppy didn't know this, but in some strange way they understood each other. This small soul, so fragile, clinging to life, would help her heal, just as she would help it. The house smelled of lavender and dust, quiet and still as the woman set the puppy down on a soft towel. It whimpered softly, eyes looking up at her with the same confusion that mirrored her own. She couldn't promise it everything. No one could. But she could offer the one thing that mattered now, a chance. Days turned to weeks, and with every step, the puppy grew stronger. It no longer curled up in fear, eyes always searching for a threat. It began to explore the house, sniffing curiously at the corners of the rooms, at the soft textures of the carpets. It began to wag its tail again, cautiously at first, then more confidently, its tiny body pulsing with the joy of newfound safety. But even as it grew, even as its wounds healed, there was something deeper that couldn't be fixed so easily. The puppy's eyes still carried that weight, a quiet sadness that refused to lift, and the woman understood. She, too, had scars, marks left by years of loneliness, of betrayals that ran deeper than any physical wound. But this tiny creature had reminded her that healing was a slow, messy process. That sometimes the most broken pieces could hold the most beauty. The puppy, now full of life, ran in the yard, its coat glistening in the late afternoon sun. It was no longer the trembling, fearful creature it once was. It was a dog, alive and vibrant, as free as it had ever been. And yet, they both knew. They weren't done yet, not by a long shot. The journey was far from over. But together, they were learning that even in the deepest of wounds, there was space for healing, and perhaps even for love. The puppy ran across the yard, its small paws kicking up dirt as it bounded around with a newfound energy. The woman watched, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, a faint smile on her lips. She hadn't realized just how much silence had filled the spaces around her until the puppy brought it all to life again. The small, rhythmic thump of paws on the earth, the rustle of leaves as the wind picked up, the occasional bark, all felt like a symphony. A promise of something whole, something connected. She knew it wasn't just the puppy's body that had healed, but something else too. A part of her that she had buried, unsure if she could ever feel the warmth of life again, was beginning to stir. It was like a seed sprouting, small at first but determined. But there were times, in the quiet moments, when the weight of the past would catch up with her. She'd find herself standing in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair across the table where someone had once sat, where a different kind of love had lived. And that empty space would settle in her chest, a hollow reminder of the years she had spent alone, wondering if she would ever be whole again. The puppy, sensing the shift in the air, trotted over, its soft body pressing against her legs, a quiet, comforting presence. It was as if it knew, in some deep way, that this was where the healing truly began, not in the moments of laughter and lightness, but in the quiet vulnerability, the understanding that no one could heal alone, not truly. The collar still sat in a small box on her dresser, a fragile memento of the life the puppy had once known. It seemed to whisper a truth she wasn't ready to face, that abandonment was not just an act. It was a story, a history, something passed down like an inheritance no one asked for. And the puppy's history was as tangled as her own. Both of them had been cast aside, left to find their way in a world that often didn't care about the broken parts. But now they had found each other. Days turned into months. The puppy, once so frail, now flourished, its coat thick and soft, eyes bright and full of mischief. It had become a dog not just in body but in spirit. It no longer looked over its shoulder in fear, no longer expected the world to turn against it. It had learned to trust, to love, and in return, it had received more than its fair share of affection. It had become the family the woman had always dreamed of without even knowing it. But with that trust came the realization that it wasn't just the puppy who had been healed. The woman found herself laughing again, truly laughing, with a lightness she hadn't known in years. She began to let go of the ghosts that had followed her for so long, learning how to be present, to love fully without the fear of abandonment that had shaped so much of her life. It was during one of their evening walks, as the golden light of the setting sun bathed everything in warmth, that the truth became undeniable. The puppy, now full grown, looked up at her, its face relaxed, a tail wagging in a slow, steady rhythm. They're both survivors of a world that hadn't always been kind, yet here they were, walking side by side, stronger because of each other. The puppy paused, sniffing the air, its ears purred to the sound of something approaching. A distant rumble of thunder echoed across the horizon. The wind shifted, cool and sharp, as dark clouds began to roll in. The woman stopped beside it, feeling a sudden surge of fear, the kind that always came before a storm that threatened to rip open old wounds. She could feel the weight of it in her chest, the pressure building. But then the puppy, looking up at her with those trusting eyes, nudged her hand gently, like it always knew exactly what she needed. She smiled, her fingers brushing through its fur. "We've made it this far, haven't we?" she whispered. The puppy let out a small, soft bark, as if to say, "Yes, we have!" The storm never came. Instead, the sun broke through the clouds, casting long, soft beams of light across the horizon. It was like a promise, a gentle reminder that, no matter the storm, there would always be a moment of calm. Together, they stood there, not just as rescuer and rescued, but as two souls who had found their way back to one another, forged by pain but bound by the strength of love. The woman realized that sometimes healing come in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments, the subtle shifts. A puppy's soft breathing as it slept beside her, a hand gently caressing its fur, the trust that had been earned and given. They had both been broken once, but they were no longer the same. They were more than survivors. They were family. And as the puppy lay down at her feet, its eyes closing peacefully, the woman knew that the hardest part of the journey, the part where you learn to love again, was finally behind her. She smiled, looking out over the yard, the sky now tinged with the softest shades of twilight. It had been a long road, but in this quiet moment she could hear her own heart beat, strong and steady, for the first time in a long time. And that was enough. The night stretched out in the kind of quiet that only comes after a storm has passed, leaving behind a sense of relief so profound it almost felt sacred. The house, which had once felt too large, too empty, was now filled with life in the most unexpected way. It wasn't just the dog anymore. It was the gentle rhythm of breathing that filled the spaces, the soft rustle of paws against the carpet, the occasional sigh of contentment that passed between them like an unspoken promise. The puppy, now fully grown into a strong, confident dog, had become a living testament to the power of second chances. As she sat on the couch, the dog curled up at her feet. A warmth spread through her that she had never quite experienced before. It wasn't the warmth of a summer day or the warmth of a fire crackling in the hearth. It was something deeper, something that came from within. It was the warmth of knowing that, against all odds, both of them had found something worth holding on to. The collar, once discarded in the street, now hung on a small hook beside the door, a relic of a painful past. She still hadn't figured out what happened to the puppy before she found it, and maybe she never would. But that was the thing about healing. The answers didn't matter as much as the journey. She had learned that. It wasn't the past that defined them. It was the present. The moments they shared now, the connection they built together, that was what mattered. The wind picked up again, rattling the windows slightly, but this time the sound didn't unsettle her. It was simply part of the world around them, part of the rhythm of life. She looked out the window, where the trees swayed gently under the weight of the evening breeze. It was quiet but alive, full of promise. And in that stillness, she realized something she hadn't been ready to admit before. She had never really been alone. Not anymore. The dog stretched out beside her, its eyes half closed, and as she reached down to scratch behind its ears, the memory of its fragile, trembling body in the alley flashed in her mind. She had rescued it, yes. But in truth, it had rescued her too. In the years of caring for the puppy, she had learned to care for herself again, to give herself the space to grieve, to heal, and to grow. They were both works in progress, still, but that was the beauty of it. They didn't have to be perfect. They didn't have to have everything figured out. They just had to keep moving forward, one step at a time, together. And maybe that was what had always been missing. The belief that it was okay to move forward, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. The belief that healing could happen not in grand moments, but in the quiet, tender ones that slowly built trust, understanding, and love. The sound of paws against the floor interrupted her thoughts. The dog got up and padded over to the door, then sat down, looking up at her with eyes that seemed to speak volumes without saying a word. She smiled, a soft laugh escaping her lips as she stood to let it outside. In that moment, she realized how far they had come, how much had changed. The backyard was bathed in moonlight, the soft glow casting everything in a peaceful, ethereal light. The dog, free of fear now, ran through the yard, its legs strong and graceful as it chased the fleeting shadows in the grass. The woman stood on the porch, watching as the dog paused in the middle of the yard, nose twitching as it sniffed the air. It was the same puppy she had found all those months ago, the one who had been abandoned, lost in a world that didn't care. But now it was alive. It was whole. And so was she. The puppy bounded back toward her, tail wagging furiously, and as it reached her, it sat at her feet, looking up with those familiar eyes that had once been filled with terror and confusion. Now they were full of trust and joy. The woman knelt down, reaching out to rub its ears, and as she did, she felt a calm wash over her. A quiet peace, deep and abiding, that told her everything would be okay. The past was a chapter she no longer needed to revisit. The future, uncertain as it always was something they would face together. In the end, it was the present that mattered most. The moments shared in the soft glow of moonlight, the quiet understanding between them, the shared warmth of two hearts learning to heal, to love, to trust again. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she was okay with that. In fact, she was more than okay. She was home. The night deepened, its silence now a comforting companion, a gentle contrast to the storm of emotions that had once overwhelmed her. She stood in the quiet backyard, her fingers still lightly brushing the dog's fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of its breath beneath her hand. The air was crisp with the freshness of the evening, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint promise of rain. Everything around them seemed to pause, as if the world was holding its breath, letting the moment stretch longer than usual. The dog, fully content now, lay at her feet, its body curled into a warm ball. She sat beside it, legs tucked beneath her, letting the cool night air weave through her thoughts. In the stillness, the weight of everything she'd endured seemed to slip away, leaving only the quiet truth of what she had found a quiet peace, not in the absence of pain, but in the space where healing could take root. Her mind drifted back to the first day she'd found the dog, to the trembling form she had carried home like something fragile, something lost. She remembered the weight of that small body in her arms, the fear in its eyes, and how it had clung to her as though it knew, even then, that she was all it had left. And in that moment, as she gazed down at the dog now stronger and more whole than she had ever imagined, she realized something that had eluded her for so long. That strength wasn't something you found outside of yourself. It was something you built, slowly and quietly, day by day, with small gestures of love, with patience, with the decision to keep moving forward, even when it seemed impossible. The dog stirred slightly in its sleep, a soft sigh escaping its lips, and she couldn't help but smile. She could still remember the day it had first barked at her, tentative, unsure, as though testing the waters of trust. Now, the sound of its bark was as natural as the wind blowing through the trees. She'd never thought she'd find herself here, in this place of quiet acceptance, but here she was, surrounded by the love of a creature that had no words to offer, only the soft assurance of its presence. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, letting the stillness seep into her bones. The past had always been there, lurking in the shadows of her memories, but it no longer had the power to control her. She had learned that the past was just that, the past. It was no longer her present, nor would it define her future. The future was theirs to create now, together. The dog stirred again, its eyes opening slowly as it gazed up at her. It looked at her with a softness that spoke more than any words could ever express. And for a brief moment she saw it, not just the dog, but the whole journey. The rescue, the pain, the healing, the trust, the love, everything they had gone through, everything that had led them here. She saw it all in the quiet gaze they shared, the understanding that had taken root between them, unspoken but undeniable. She reached down, gently stroking the dog's head, and in that simple act, everything that had once seemed so broken, so impossible, finally made sense. She wasn't just a woman who had rescued a dog. She was someone who had rediscovered a part of herself she thought she had lost forever. And this dog, this small creature who had once been abandoned, was now her companion, her constant, her anchor. As the moon hung high above them, casting its pale light over the yard, she realized that there would always be more challenges ahead. Life was never without its hardships, its ups and downs. But she had learned that it wasn't about avoiding the pain. It was about learning to live with it, to grow from it, to rise above it. And in this quiet moment, under the watchful eyes of the stars, she understood that everything she needed had been right here all along. The dog, now awake and alert, stood up and padded over to the door, turning back to look at her as if to say, "Let's go inside." She smiled, rising to her feet and following it inside. As she closed the door behind her, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the puppy, for the journey they had shared, for the love that had come in the most unexpected form. Inside, the house was warm. the soft glow of the lamp casting gentle shadows across the room. She settled in her favorite chair, the dog curling up at her feet, its body once again at ease. The world outside might still be uncertain, but in this small corner of it, she felt whole. She felt, for the first time in years, like she belonged, not just to the world, but to herself. The future was still a mystery, but as the dog slept peacefully at her feet, she knew one thing for sure. She was ready to face whatever came next. Together, and in that quiet understanding, that shared space, she realized that healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that was never truly finished. But with the right companion by your side, it was a journey worth taking. The path ahead might be long, but she had found her way. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. The dog shifted slightly in its sleep, a contented sigh escaping its lips, and as the woman looked down at it, she knew one thing for certain: no matter what the future held, they would face it together. The days that followed were quiet, but in the most comforting way. The world outside continued its endless cycle. The seasons changed, people came and went, but in this small house, everything felt right. The woman spent her mornings sipping coffee by the window, watching the sunrise light up the sky with soft hues of pink and orange. The dog, now a familiar presence in every corner of her life, would curl up by her feet or nudge her hand with its wet nose, a silent but constant reminder that, despite everything, life could still be simple and beautiful. Each day, they grew more inseparable. The dog had become more than just a companion. It had become her anchor, the steady rhythm to her heartbeat, a source of unwavering loyalty and unconditional love. And in return, she offered the same. She poured her love into every moment they shared. Whether it was the quiet hours spent by the fire, the long walks through the neighborhood, or even the simplest of tasks like feeding it or brushing its coat, it wasn't just about the routine, it was about the presence. The presence of someone who, despite having been abandoned, now had a place to call home. But even as she marveled at the transformation in the dog, she couldn't help but reflect on how much she, too, had changed. The woman who had walked into this journey with a heart heavy with loss had, over time, shed the layers of sadness, the quiet despair that had once been her constant companion. And though the scars from her past remained, faint reminders of the pain she had lived through, they no longer defined her. They were part of her story, yes, but they no longer held the power to steal her peace. She had found a quiet strength, a resilience that came not from fighting against the darkness, but from accepting it as part of the light. Her connection with the dog had shown her that they had both faced rejection, fear, and loss. But together, they had created something new, a bond that was unbreakable, forged through the fires of their pasts. One evening, as the two of them sat side by side on the porch, the dog's head resting on her lap, she realized something. The dog had been through so much, and yet it had never given up. It had never stopped believing that there was something worth living for, and in its quiet strength, it had taught her to do the same. In the twilight hours, as the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, she reached down to stroke the dog's fur. The feeling of its warmth, the steady rise and fall of its chest, was a comfort that went beyond words. She knew that she didn't need to understand everything, the world, the past, or the future. What mattered was that, in this moment, they were both exactly where they were meant to be. She thought of the puppy she had found all those months ago. The trembling, fragile creature who had been cast aside as though it didn't matter. The puppy that had taught her to believe in second chances, to believe in the possibility of starting over, no matter how broken things seemed. And now, here they were, together, healed, whole, and ready to face whatever lay ahead. She stood up slowly, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air, and looked around. The house was filled with quiet joy. The yard, the trees, the sky, everything seemed to be in harmony. The dog, sensing her movement, stood beside her, its tail wagging softly. They walked inside together, a simple but profound gesture of their shared journey. The next few months passed in a blur of contentment and small moments of growth. The woman found herself smiling more often, laughing more easily. There were still hard days, of course, days when the shadows of her past crept back in, when the weight of old wounds threatened to pull her under. But with the dog by her side, she learned to meet those days with courage, to face them with the knowledge that she was not alone. And then, one day, while they were out walking in the park, something shifted. The dog paused in front of a large oak tree, its nose twitching as it sniffed the ground. She stood beside it waiting. She had come to understand the dog's little gestures, its subtle cues, and she knew it was searching for something, perhaps a familiar scent, perhaps a memory of its old life. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a way of acknowledging the past, of honoring where it had come from before stepping forward into the future. The dog turned to her, its eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. She could feel its unspoken gratitude, its silent promise to never leave her side, and in return, she whispered, "We're here now. Together." With that, the dog wagged its tail and ran ahead, its energy infectious as it bounded through the grass, free and joyful, just as it was meant to be. The woman watched, her heart swelling with pride, with a love so pure and deep that it almost ached. She wasn't just watching a dog play. She was watching a soul, once lost and broken, reclaiming its place in the world. And as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the park, she realized that this was the true meaning of healing. It wasn't in the absence of pain, but in the ability to move forward, to live fully, and to love without fear. It was about finding the courage to step into the future, no matter what it held, with someone by your side who believed in you, even when you couldn't believe in yourself. The journey wasn't over. It had never truly been about reaching some distant destination. It had been about the steps taken, the love shared, and the quiet, beautiful moments that made it all worth it. And as the woman stood there, watching the dog run free, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. No matter what the future held, they had already found the greatest gift of all, each other. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and violet, as the woman and the dog made their way home. The gentle evening breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, the scent of earth and fresh grass filling the air. The dog, once so fragile and scared, now ran with a freedom that was contagious. Its joyful barks echoed through the quiet street as it chased after the flickering shadows cast by the fading light. The woman smiled softly, her hand resting on the dog's back as it trotted beside her. It was a calm, peaceful moment, one she had once thought impossible. A year ago, she had found this small, trembling creature, discarded and broken, and now here it was, full of life and joy. And so was she. She had learned something profound from the dog, something she hadn't realized until recently, that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey. It was about the small steps forward, the moments of grace and strength that arose in the quiet spaces between the chaos. It was about showing up for each other, even when the past threatened to pull them back, even when the weight of old wounds felt heavy. She and the dog had both survived things that could have shattered them, but instead they had learned to rebuild, to trust, and to find love in the most unexpected places. Together they had healed. Together they had found home in each other. When they arrived back at the house, the dog trotted inside first, its tail wagging enthusiastically. The woman followed, her heart light, her mind at ease. The house, which had once felt like an empty shell, now felt full of memories, of moments of love. It wasn't perfect. There were things unsaid, things left to discover about themselves and the world around them. But it didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to be real. The dog curled up in its favorite spot by the window, its eyes half lidded in contentment. The woman sank into the couch, pulling a soft blanket over herself. The house was quiet, save for the occasional sound of the dog's soft breathing. She felt a deep sense of peace wash over her, a peace she hadn't known in years. She had finally come to terms with her own journey, with the realization that life wasn't about avoiding pain, but learning how to move forward with it. And in this space, with the dog at her feet, she knew that there was no other place she'd rather be. The journey hadn't been easy. It had been messy and complicated, full of uncertainty and fear. But as the evening wrapped around her like a warm embrace, she realized that the greatest gift was not the absence of pain, but the presence of love. It was the ability to rebuild and move forward, even when the past tried to hold them back. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own moments of doubt and fear, but she was no longer afraid. Not with the dog by her side. They had learned to trust each other, to face the unknown together. And in that bond, there was strength. She closed her eyes for a moment, the soft hum of the house filling her ears. A sense of quiet joy settled over her. They had both come from places of brokenness, from abandonment and loss. But now, together, they were whole. Together, they had found a love that transcended everything. A love that didn't ask for perfection, but simply for presence. The woman smiled as she glanced down at the dog, its eyes closed in peaceful slumber. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was home. It wasn't just the house that felt like home. It was the life they had built together. It was the love they had shared and the healing they had found, both in each other and in themselves. She whispered softly, "We made it, didn't we?" The dog's tail thumped once, as if in agreement. And in that quiet, simple moment, she knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Because sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about grand gestures or dramatic moments. They're about the quiet moments of healing, of trust, of companionship, and of love that grows in the most unexpected places. And as the night deepened, wrapping its soft arms around them, the woman knew that whatever came next, they were ready. Together.